a transfer of costs from the city over to Detroiters.
Your voice, thoughts, knowledge, and perspective on what's happening in Detroit, to Detroit, and for Detroit is important to us. This is why we want you to Tell Us Detroit. Tell Us Detroit is the inaugural Town Hall Community Meeting Series presented by Bridge Detroit and Detroit is Different. Tuesday, July 12th, 2022, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. is the citywide Tell Us Detroit Community Town Hall meeting. Join us on Belle Isle Park at Shelter 8 for Tell Us Detroit Community Town Hall meeting. Register online on Eventbrite or Facebook. We are the media that wants you to Tell Us Detroit.
This blight remediation in our city is preparing for development and the hell with the residents.
All right, welcome back to the Detroit is Different podcast, and we're back in the studios. Summer's rolling, and with summer comes more creativity. It definitely comes the sunny, bright lights and so much more. And when we talk about bright lights, the first thing that I think of is theater. Detroit has a rich history in theater, and anything in Detroit, we definitely talking about black folks, because this is for sure a chocolate city.
Right.
And somebody that has carried a flag, a banner, an anchor when it comes to theater in the city of Detroit, giving black folks an opportunity, not just black folks, but like I say, when you talk Detroit, you talking us. Mr. Gary Anderson at Plowshares Theater Company. How are you doing, Mr. Anderson?
I'm doing fine, Curry. Thank you for this opportunity.
Oh man, it's everything is everything, and we cross paths.
Right.
I've actually been connected to Plowshares and you longer than you remember, because it's like when you're doing a production, there's so many people on the production.
Right.
If you knew everybody on a production, you would be like like Rain Man or something.
You reminded me, because and I was happy to hear that you had done like 2 or 3 shows that worked with us on sound and whatnot. So I'm glad to reconnect.
Yeah, definitely. Early in my sound engineering days, where it's like, wait, I'm looking, and then it's like, oh, 1 second, the cue. It's like that guy just broke a bottle. You got to have a
right.
It's like bottle break. It's like, hey, what you doing, man? So like just getting that flow in staging and theater. I've given a short introduction, but Plowshares Theater is a company that's been around for decades.
Yes, it has. We were originally founded in 1989. We began producing shows in 1990, and so that's we're coming up on our 32nd anniversary in a year. We're close to marking our 31st anniversary this year. So yeah, we've been around a bit.
It went from now it's driving, it can have a drink, it got a kid and family. It's 32 years old.
Yeah, tell me about it. I got 2 kids. Grown.
Yep. Yeah. So with this being said, like the whole concept in theater, in Detroit theater, we're gonna get into the usual Detroit is Different story.
Okay.
But before we get into that, you have a big piece coming up soon.
Yes, we do.
It goes right into the Detroit history.
Right.
And we're gonna talk more about it.
Right.
Hastings Street.
Yes.
Hastings Street is a staple of Black Bottom Detroit. If you don't know about Black Bottom Detroit, you can Google it right now. You can know so much about it. I mean, so many songs that cover it. If you're in the blues like myself, if you're in the jazz like many others, I like jazz too, but it's covered through most pop culture history too, of that time, when we think of that era. And it was a staple for like all of the champions in boxing, all of the black elites in business, in most arcs of society, and even some of the white elites would come and hang out and be a part of what this rich tradition was.
Black Bottom was the name for the segregated black community that African Americans were relegated to, because Detroit, for a large portion, had covenant laws which restrict black people from buying houses wherever they were available in the city. The Ossian Sweet story, you may know, is an example of this. He attempted to defy a covenant law that existed in that neighborhood. So the majority of African Americans for the large portion of the 20th century lived in Black Bottom, which basically went from Gratiot to Gratiot on one side, Grand River, Jefferson, and I forgot the most eastern border, but it was a large swath of downtown where black folks existed. And Hastings Street was the main thoroughfare. It was the Woodward of Black Bottom, and it was the place where a number of major cultural organizations, entertainment spots, food and whatnot that existed in the community. It was a thriving, dynamic, and exciting part of Detroit.
And the play, Hastings Street.
Right.
You're presenting that. And this is going to be an experience that people can take on the music hall.
Right.
It's going to be taking place July
The
2022, the 21st
Through the 31st.
through the end of the month. So you
Right.
got 10 days.
Right.
You can check this out. So
So the show is our fictional presentation of what happened. In 1949, the federal government passed and President Truman signed the Housing Act of 1949. The idea was that was going to usher in what they originally called slum removal, but because that didn't test well,
yeah, you got that right.
they rewrote it into what we call urban renewal. And urban renewal was supposed to, after World War II, invest heavily in urban communities and revitalize them. We had a war dividend. We had a big resource that had been created during the war. We were much more prosperous, and the argument was that this was going to help revitalize our urban core. It was also used by many politicians in communities across this country to disenfranchise African Americans and also brown people and anybody else that wasn't white. If you look at where a number of the areas that were quote unquote designated as slums, they were in these what they would have called minority communities. And so they attacked them with this initiative, with these resources that had been allocated to the cities to raise what they said was the most damaged, the most unreformable, redevelopable parts of the community, the properties. What they ended up doing is actually, as you know, they displaced an entire community of people because there was a second phase that occurred in 1956 with the Interstate Highway Act that was designed on creating the interstate highways throughout so that people's mobility could be greater. What they really were doing was finding ways for whites that were becoming restless living in cities, having the opportunity to quickly live in the suburbs and cut down their travel time. So it was the interstate highway that created the suburbs and exurbs and all the other parts that surrounded many urban cores, and that happened here. So they began with the Housing Act, trying to tear down these buildings. In many cases, the argument was that they were going to redevelop them. They're going to put new housing, new businesses on that land. That never happened. They bought up the land, they displaced people, and when the interstate highway funding came through, they just concreted over and turned it into 375 for the most part. So they really decimated an entire core community that existed here.
So the play's going to get into that, and we'll pick up with more of that. But now let's get into that classic Detroit is different.
Yeah.
Your Detroit story. What brought you, your family? What was it to Detroit?
It was 1983, and I had been at a couple of universities. I was originally trying to go to school for theater outside of the state of Michigan, and I'd gotten a Pell Grant, which at one time was just going to pay for everything. But that was also the year that the country elected Ronald Reagan. And so in August, before I left for Milwaukee to study at the University of Wisconsin, I got a letter from the federal government saying, your award is going to be adjusted, but don't worry, we'll get back to you in a month or so. And I went thinking, I'm going to tell you how much money they gave me. It was ridiculously how cheap things were in 1983. And in 1981, I got a Pell Grant for $5,500. That was enough money to pay for my entire tuition and my housing, out-of-state tuition.
Wow.
I ended up getting a notification that my $5,500 grant had been cut down to $1,500. So I couldn't afford to stay out. So I ended up coming home during, at Christmas. And I spent a year taking care of my elderly great-grandmother until she passed. And in '83, I was ready to try to get my education back online. And so I decided I knew I couldn't afford to leave the state. And so I came down to Wayne State. And so I moved to Detroit in '83.
Okay. Where are your people originally from?
My folks originally are from Florence, Alabama. They moved up here in the late 50s.
Where to?
To Ypsilanti.
Okay. So Ypsilanti, as they know, I guess it's like the brother or sister city of Ann Arbor.
To a certain extent.
Even though it is, when I talk to people from Ypsilanti, they're like, you realize it's still about 15, 20 minutes away.
Right.
But it seems like to Detroiters, it's like, they just, it's
right.
like Detroit and Southfield to a Detroiter, and then you get up there.
Exactly.
And it's like, nah.
Exactly. The difference is not that great.
So, a little bit of the culture there, being in that footprint of being in Ypsilanti at the time, like we're talking 70s, 80s. We're
talking 60. I was born in 1962, so I was talking 60s, 70s, early 80s. Because when I left.
Okay.
My mother still lives there, but aside from that, I have no family there
in that footprint.
Right. Yeah. A predominantly white community, and so aspects of black culture weren't endorsed on a grand level, but because I lived in the black community and we were doing black centered activities. So you have the Afro-American cultural affair that would be in the schools parking lot, and in their on their land you would have church events that would be connected that were pro-black. There were business members that lived in my neighborhood and whatnot. My grandfather had a business that supported he and my grandmother. And so there were aspects of the culture that I was being exposed to just because I lived in proximity to it.
What about it being like a collegiate town? Did it feel like a college town?
It is. I mean, I did my first year of undergraduate at Eastern.
Okay.
With a stipend. I got a scholarship to go there, and I was an actor, but I got there and I realized that as a black man, I really wasn't going to get the work that I wanted to get that was going to hone me. And then I found out some interesting things about some of the faculty. They were traditional in a very destructive way. In that they had certain attitudes about certain people, and that had an impact on how they taught their students. And I learned a long time ago, you don't pay somebody to insult you.
True.
Right.
That makes perfect sense. And we think about just that relationship of Eastern Michigan. For some unique reason, it's a lot of Detroiters that go to Eastern, more so than a lot of other places.
When I was there, Eastern was known as a really strong school education type. So if you wanted to be a teacher, you could get a good education. You could go off and get a job in the southeastern Michigan area with no problem. So Eastern produced a lot of teachers for the state of Michigan in the latter part of the 20th century.
So from there, Detroit in Wayne State. So I know just being in Ypsi, you've come down here before, you visited, you kind of knew some of the culture.
I did.
What made you jump the fence and say, okay, I'm moving there and I'm going?
Because I wanted to be where the action was. And I know in '83, if you can remember, that was a year after the Hudson's building closed. A lot of the things that were being done in the city that was basically tearing it down, or things closing, or the depression of the city, that was happening when I moved here. So, but I still thought that there was something grand that could be found here, and I had a wonderful education at Wayne. Not to say that all of the teachers were more progressive, they weren't, but what Wayne State provided me as a student, both as an undergraduate and a graduate, was the ability for me to learn on my own. The spaces when I was there were available, and by the time I got to Wayne, I had decided to shift from being an actor to a director. And so I wanted to direct, and what I needed was a space to direct in. And Wayne had spaces that allowed me to do my work unencumbered, make grand mistakes, have wonderful successes. But I learned a lot because I was able to do a lot. The program isn't exactly that way today, but that was really what kicked me off,
And then we think of the culture of Wayne State in the 80s. And this is, and you were there before you were there before the protest for the Black Studies.
I was there after. I was there during the protest of the Black Studies.
Well, you started.
I was after the protest of the Black protest of the theater department. In fact, one of the reasons why I think they brought me in as a student in the early '80s was in response to all those things that had gone down in the late '70s about the student body, the lack of adequate faces involved in the curriculum and in the student body in the program.
Okay, so in that consciousness and just even that footprint, like so much has shifted in what's labeled now, I guess, as labeled as Midtown. It had a different feel in the 80s. It had a different feel in the 90s. So, like it's always been a center to me, and it's to some degree, but it just doesn't feel as artistic. But at one point in time, it just felt very artistic. It felt like that was the place where if you wanted to walk around, with blue hair and a mohawk, and it's like it felt like almost like a New York-ish,
bruh,
in the middle of Detroit.
You speak in gospel there. Yeah. At the time when I was there was a lot of activity and a lot of us really kind of showing who we were throughout everything, through our clothing, through our music, through the art that we created. And there was a real vibrancy, but it wasn't an anti-establishment, but it was a counterculture, definitely, very much so. And the neighborhood I lived in, which was right there in proximity to the college, it allowed us to be in a kind of bohemian lifestyle. My first apartment when I was in school, I had 3 roommates, and we hung out. Our apartment, we were in the ABC buildings down off of Cat, and we called our building, it was like a dorm, because the majority of the people in the apartments were theater related, and they went to Wayne, but they were theater related. So it is almost as if we created our own enclave. We also really had a great ability of cross-pollinating, influencing one another in regards to music, in regards to concepts about theater, art in general. And I had one of my roommates was Puerto Rican and gay. He came out during our time living together. He didn't tell me this is who he was before, and it was fine. But that was an experience that I would not have had I not been in the theater. And so I got firsthand to understand the challenges that he felt, not only as a man of color, but also as a gay man coming out in the 80s with AIDS and all the rest of the things that were going down.
I was going to say a different time.
Yeah, completely different time. Completely different time. I also got exposed to, I don't use drugs, but I was exposed to a number of people who did, who the experience they thought was helping them get into create, and I think you realize that it doesn't always work that way. Yeah.
I think definitely at that time, and we're talking like early 80s when, I was born in 82.
Right.
But the arc of people say like crack destroyed the community. It definitely changed certain things, but I that's why I like the first couple seasons of Snowfall so much, because it paints the picture of, and this is a Kari take, okay, for everybody watching, all right? So, cocaine, for most people in the 70s, was a glamour drug. It was something of opulence. It was something of success. It was you smoke.
It was like
weed,
having a Cadillac,
or having champagne, or celebration type thing. You smoke weed every day of the week, but this is a celebration. Let's do cocaine.
Right.
But it came at a high cost, and most people didn't have access to it.
Right.
So now you have this like fast food version of cocaine and crack. And most people are like, wow, I know these celebrities do it. I've heard so much of this. It's where things go. And it's basically the same stuff. Why don't I try it? So, you have to. So, I think Snowfall did a great example of, presenting it from that angle. Because now, oftentimes, when we look at it in retrospect without looking at it from the onset of the beginning and not even understanding what that addiction could and how that addiction could impact the community.
What you really were seeing was the similar approach that Chrysler took to creating cars they could produce for every type of customer. So you had Chryslers, you had Dodge Mercurys.
Yeah.
You eventually ended up having the Eagles and AMC when they purchased them, right? And all of those brands were at a different price point. So the idea was that Chrysler could produce a car for everyone, right? Likewise, with drug dealers, you found that those who couldn't afford cocaine, you could give them crack, and that would be sufficient because of the way you looked at that as a market segment.
Yes.
You wanted their money. You didn't have much respect for them, but you wanted their money, and so you found a way of creating a product that they would find accessible.
Yeah, and sadly, the same way that right now certain drugs are a part of American culture. So let's just be honest about it.
Right.
So, but that being there, witnessing that, especially in the art scene, because artists usually look to possibly a substance or possibly a relationship, look to muses, look to inspirations in different places and formats. It could be a restaurant. It could be I just want to go to this coffee shop and write or whatever. You know what I mean?
The thing that saved me from that was actually getting deeper into our culture and really looking at that as the fountain from which I took water, the fountain from which I was inspired for much of the stuff I did. I did work through most of my college, my undergraduate, my graduate work, which was basically taking white European plays and producing them to the satisfaction of a white European faculty. And my desire was to have a theater that could reflect the concerns, ideas, and opinions of black folks just like you and me. Because even though we see black folks in front of the camera, in many cases, the work we see on television, the work we see in films, those are not products that are created by African Americans. And here's another sad story. Just because it has a black writer or has a black director does not mean it is black consciousness. And so coming up the way I did, coming out of Wayne, Plowshares was really created as a mechanism by which we could actually do work that was culturally based.
And I want to expand upon that.
Sure.
Because it's so many creatives I meet a lot of times. And even having the stage, I'm doing a lot of studio now. You see me in my a lot of studio shirt, me, Piper. Artists are so eager to like get an opportunity.
Right.
They want the stage, which
Right.
I support.
Right.
But for a stage, and especially a stage that I feel gives a good presentation, it comes for me at least with a lot of other responsibilities and an understanding of a lot of the thought process where I know that really I'm walking this path in certain ways by myself. And I'm painting a picture of a dream I have in my mind that really nobody else understands. They see themselves in the role of like getting on the stage, but for that stage to exist, it may be thousands of other steps that even come together for me to, get my community stage popping and right next door to my house, have a band on stage and play a song.
Right. And the thing that we have probably made the biggest mistake on is how we have usually attempted to replicate the model that has been presented for us. And what I mean by that is we take a Eurocentric focus and that we would try to replicate it. And we use their benchmarks as the benchmarks we create for success. And what we find is invariably, no matter what happens, one of two things can occur. Either we fail because we want to do something more consciously based, more culturally based, and a model that really isn't designed to support that. And so we fail financially, we fail culturally, we fail in a number of ways. Or we abandon those principles for the sake of financial success, popularity and whatnot.
What you just said is definitely very deep, and that's where I kind of want to lean into some of your story, because I look to someone like you or Oliver Ragsdale. I look to Zaina from Spectacles. I look to George Nnamdi. I look to Njia Kai, like these cultural creatives.
Yes, yeah.
Which now it's like new terms and art direction. And there's so much new stuff that comes out now, and I like
keep finding
jargon.
new ways to say the same thing.
Yes, but finding this space where you do have something that's intentional and purposeful, where it's in a creative space in an industrial city. What is that like, getting the buy-in as you getting the buy-in of an audience to even have an understanding? As I love what you said, like building like the framework and the platforms where we're now not necessarily looking at it through the lens of like, if I'm going to see a play, I need to look at it at the standard of the play that was set through the standard in my mind through greater society. I need to look at it at the standard that's set from Plowshares.
Right. So one of the things that we're doing with this production, this is the first show we will have done. It's our relaunch, our reopening, our return to the stage. And we're doing this huge musical because somebody told me, you crazy for trying to do that the first thing out. I said, no, it's for a reason.
It's intentional.
It's intentional because, like you said, we need to reset the standards. In 2020, when Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and on and on and on were being killed on the streets, where black life had no value, I was paying attention to that. And for me, it became clear that I couldn't come back and just do anything and call it black theater. We have a responsibility to address many of the challenges and concerns and circumstances. We're now sitting here at the cusp of probably the most conservative wave that's ever hit this country in my lifetime. Things that I grew up assuming were just standard, acceptable, are being whittled away on a daily basis. And if we have a school system that is going to be constrained by not being able to tell the truth, it becomes incumbent upon artists to step in and stand in the gap. We have to, as storytellers, evoke the names and the circumstances of our ancestors and use those as a catalyst to raise awareness. And it's our responsibility to educate anybody who's willing to listen about that. So that means it's not about just focusing on something that's just simply an entertaining idea. There is sustenance here. There's food here. The musical that we're doing, the music is phenomenal. We just did a stumble through, which is you sketch out everything, you block out everything. We only gotten through the first act. We did a stumble through of that just to see pacing and see where we're at, how much people retained. And the show already looks good. The reading we did a couple of weeks ago, that was good. So what I'm trying to tell you is that there is something here. Prior to this, Plowshares, to be quite frank, has struggled over the last 32, 33 years fighting to try to do the work that we believe it's important to be done.
Yeah.
And there are others who have stepped forward on occasions who have gotten the limelight and gotten the attention for being diverse, but their commitment to that principle is only short-lived. We need a sustained institution, and that's really what I recommitted to myself to when we were sitting around on our hands for 2 years, hoping and praying that we were going to be able to come back and invite people into a theater once again.
Yeah.
I told my audience in April of 2020 that Plowshares was going to come out of this stronger than it went in. And I can tell you that we have.
That's good.
We're better funded. We have a strong policy formation of what we want to do. We know who we are. We know what we need to go after. And as you said earlier, our work is extremely intentional. So there's never going to be a question on the part of any audience member as to what they are receiving from Plowshares Theater Company.
And I think that just even seeing you being so impassioned about this mission, it permeates through the project. It impacts everyone involved in it. And that's one of the things about these creative projects that, as difficult as it can be,
Right.
it also is fulfilling to inspire, especially people in this industrial town,
Right,
where they
right.
feel creativity is something like, what are you doing? You know, like almost like it's whereas I feel creativity is the lifeblood of our people.
Right,
But,
right.
you know,
It
it can
is.
almost be like looked at like you're crazy for trying it, because in the structure of this society,
Right.
how we interpret it, it's only like a certain, as you say, it's only certain paths
Right.
and gateways to get there.
Right.
But like when that passion comes together and you have the person opening the curtains. I mean, the face of the person that welcomes you to the
Right.
door to give you
Right.
the playbill.
Right.
The person that, you know, is loading out the food, so it's food in the back for the actors and
Right.
actresses, and the makeup, the lighting, the sound, the costumes.
All of it.
Like if everyone is moving in that mission, it now an energy and a spirit starts connecting, where that even connects and plays through to the crowd, where now it's like we feel like we're a part of something. I feel like I'm witnessing something. This
Right.
is experiential
in a deeper
beyond
way.
if it was just something watching on the screen.
Right. You can enjoy a show, but if you sense it, you feel it, you understand it's trying to do something to you. Yeah, that's a different experience. That's the experience we're trying to put on the stage. One of the concepts, the foundational ideas, the principles that we're working with now is Harambe. And it's Swahili for all pull together. All pull together, right?
The end of every Kwanzaa celebration.
Right,
Go 7 times.
So our objective is one thing I know. I don't do this by myself. But that we all understand, and I told it to the cast when we got together for the reading, I told them that this show doesn't work unless we're all committed to making it work. And they accept, they people have a tendency to say yeah, but I say you have to understand this. This is going to be the most challenging project all of us have ever been involved in. And when we succeed. And it's taken only a few days for that to really sink in.
For that unity to build.
Right.
And as we talk about this unity building, and I want to talk some more about, I mean, there's so many things that now this discussion has me going in my mind.
Oh, good.
So going back to you in that time, in that transition, and even the foundation of Plowshares.
Right.
As much as we talked a little bit about, some of the ways people would escape,
right.
It was also centered, the Pan-African consciousness
right.
was more it was a part of pop culture in certain ways through hip hop. It was a part of through film, through theater, through visual art.
Right.
It was a different time when we think about that mid to late 80s and that foundation of where Plowshares was. Whereas when we think of today and where things stand with where African-centered consciousness here in America, things are different. It's a black consciousness.
Absolutely.
It's a move for diversity, but it just feels a little bit different.
It has to be. It has to be, because what we need to understand is that the tools we've used. What is it? Audre Lorde. You ever hear her?
Yes.
She says the master's tools cannot tear down the master's house. Right.
True indeed.
So we have to understand we can't use what they use.
Yeah.
So we have to create an entirely different mechanism by which we want to achieve our goals. If we want a world where Black lives actually matter, we have to create the messaging throughout everything we do that centers those Black lives and establishes for an audience why those Black lives are important.
See, and now you're really speaking to me, and you got me triggered. You got my mind going, because that creativity ties to the culture.
Exactly.
So when people talk about, like, why is culture so important? Culture is so important because culture, especially with us, it builds the framework and the blueprint for how we establish standard.
Exactly.
Like, as they say, it's like, what do they say? Like, it took years for somebody to run like the 5-minute mile, and then after that person did it, then it happened after. I think that same flow is existent with how we impact through creativity.
Right.
I mean, Black culture itself is the leading, I would say, export for America, and the leading standard for what pop culture is in society. Like, never in my life, I was born in 82, and I always loved hip hop.
Right.
Never in my life, if you would have told me in 87, 88, when I was listening to Run DMC and stuff, because my cousin's spinning it, that, okay, one day this will be the leading standard of how a lot of pop culture is delivered, to the point where it will be white neo-Nazi groups that make rap songs that sound just like the rap beats that rappers are having. That is the rallying cry for anti-Black propaganda. Like, I'd have been like, man, I'd I'd have been like, no, they'll be listening to rock and roll
No,
because
no,
that's what they do.
no.
You know what I mean?
But that's how appropriation works.
And not just
Right.
appropriation, but I think it's like our standard. It's definitely that, but like we almost set a standard for what becomes cool, what becomes where things are, and that richness. Sometimes I don't know how that we don't connect to the
Right.
richness of it.
Well,
all
you
the
know
time.
what it is that we live a life where on a regular basis we are constantly told that what we do doesn't have any worth. And part of that is by design. Part of that is by if we devalue what we create, they can easily come and imitate it and present it to us as something authentic. So regardless of whether they acknowledge the fact that this stuff comes from black creators or it was inspired by black creativity, they always end up benefiting from because they become the originators. Perfect example. So you have classical music in the world, the European Western classical music, right? The idea behind being successful in classical music is no matter what subsequent decade or century it is, somebody in 2022, an expert musician is required to sound exactly like someone when that music was originally written. So if you're playing it in 2022 and it was written in 1819, you are required to sound as if you were in 1819. That's and so we the thing where the measurements by which we look at success is all on execution, imitation, replication, and precision. An African-centered approach is completely different. We never do it the same way twice.
Billie Holiday.
Right? So that's why when you were growing up, you would have the rap, then you'd have the extended rap, and then you'd have the rap featuring some specialists, right?
Yeah.
And so the whole thing was, it was constantly being reinvented because the concept, an African concept of creativity is that the creativity never stops. We are constantly imagining. So we have that for 500 years, the Western idea of music and how that, what is the one movement that countered at that? The formation of jazz. Jazz brought in improvisation. In fact, the music industry we have today would not exist if jazz hadn't been created. Jazz allowed us to recreate in the moment, be inspired by artists we were playing with at that time. And what it did was it unleashed the creativity that became popular music in this country. The real creativity that became popular music, but they had to divorce it from black culture.
Yeah.
So the first jazz artists that get recorded in this country are white men. And when they are interviewed, they clearly say there is no black influence, there's no Negro influence in this art form. And that has been the case regardless of what industry you talk about. The innovations that African Americans have made in sports, in visual arts, in business, and other areas of our society have always been ignored or diminished as important in the context of giving credit. Because we can't have created something that then is emulated by white people that is of worth. Now they can come back and reinvent it,
Yeah.
but we can't be the originators of it. And that's happened pretty consistently.
Yeah.
So, but we are the mother's milk of American creativity.
Definitely.
I have a friend of mine who says So here is a two-phase phrase. So imagine America without black culture.
It is like a lot of those countries, I assume, in like the Eastern European bloc that people don't know about.
Right.
Like I always say, imagine Michigan without Detroit. It's Montana,
Right.
South
Exactly.
Dakota,
Right.
North
Right.
Dakota. It's
Right.
it's one of it's
Right.
a, as they say, flyover state.
If you take that aspect of black culture out of that environment, you completely change the chemistry of that environment.
Yeah.
So imagine America without black culture. Now,
Yep.
imagine black culture without Detroit.
Oh man.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, it. You know, I'm always like going back and forth. The other day, I was somebody that put something up about the funk down in Dayton, and I was just messing with them.
You know
I'm like,
what?
you know, them Dayton guys was coming up here dealing with Don Davis to
Right.
get that feel. You know what I mean? But that's a whole nother
And so
discussion.
Plowshares exist as a way of cultivating that innate talent that's here. It's a way for us to create writers and directors, designers, musicians, composers that are here who can't initially go elsewhere, or if they do, we provide them with a forum, a showcase, a platform,
Yeah.
so that we can start saying, no, we can do this here. Because one of the reasons why the Detroit used to be a home for the creation of new musicals. Hello Dolly started here in Detroit before it went to Broadway. Seven Brides and Seven Brothers started here in Detroit before it went to Broadway. But there's been no black musicals that started here. And I'm not saying that Hastings Street is going to be picked up and go to Broadway. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that we create the catalyst for black creativity to occur here at a level where people can see that it can be moved easily into other markets, other venues elsewhere. So as opposed to always asking what somebody did in New York, somebody did in Atlanta, and bringing that here, Detroit needs to be
The place
where these things create. And Plowshares wants to be the home where we cultivate that work for the stage.
So when we talk about that, the casting and finding crew and stuff like that, because like you say, I mean, it's a lot that goes into it. Set design, sound design. We talked a little bit about costumes, but, you know, and then even just running stage management. How do you go about finding the team? And do you rotate your team, or do you kind of like, is it like project to project? How do you find the right matches?
In some cases, it's project to project because you have to find the right fit. In other cases, we try to use projects where we have the resources to bring on people who may not have the full, toolbox of talents and skills, and allow them to work on a production that gives them those kind of skills. We're doing some assistant designer positions on this show.
Okay.
In large part because I want to not have to question, where am I going to get black designers to do my shows? Where am I going to find black stage managers to do my shows? Where am I going to find black directors? I'm desperate to create opportunities for black folks who take the craft of directing seriously. And I put that caveat on it. There are a bunch of actors who, because they can't get work, think that they can direct, and they may be able to, but it requires you to be open to understanding that directing is more than just talking to the actors.
Expound, because in my mind, I'm a novice here.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing.
What's a director doing in a play?
A director in a production has to see the show before anybody else sees it. I usually tell it like this way. In the course of any production, there is a time when the playwright knows the play better than anybody else. There comes a time later on when the director knows the show better than anybody else. And then there comes a time when the actor on stage, breathing and delivering lines to an audience, knows the show better than anybody else. Because the creative process has to move that centered knowledge from the playwright through the director to the actor on stage, because the commitment has to be sincere and strong when they're telling the story. we have to understand that a director just does just that. They set the direction and the course for the show.
So is that through like is that kind of like having good people skills, a little bit of psychology,
It's people
is it
skills, but
sociology? Like what
it's all
what
of
are
that.
they, you know?
But it's also about interpretation. It's also about comprehending what this work can say. Because in many cases, the statements, the ideas, the messages of a play may not be
Explicit.
and they might not be explicit.
It's implicit.
Right.
And people have to gain that understanding. And then even like I even use the term, not breaking the fourth wall. People have to understand and interpret certain things.
They have to see behavior that they see as familiar, and they have to see it in a fashion where they understand what really is going down here. Once did a show where two men who were fighting over one woman. One of the guys was gone. He was in jail, and while he was in jail, another guy tried to make time with his girl.
That sounds like a
That sounds
tale
like a
as
lot-
old as time.
That sounds
as
like a
they
lot
say.
of stories.
Yes, a tale as old as time.
So he comes back home. He tries to make it good with his girl, and she tries to keep it quiet that this fellow was coming by. And they get into this conversation while they're in the backyard playing a game of poker, and the guy who was trying to make time on somebody else's woman, he starts talking about this rooster. One of the neighbors got a rooster. They live in a city. They live in the black neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And he starts talking about the rooster, and he said that rooster only crows at such a time. Well, the brother's sitting there playing poker. He's losing anyway at the game, and he's irritated at that. He figures he wakes up saying, "How the hell you know what time that rooster crows? When was you over here, right?" And he has to get out of that because he done said something that could lead to the brother understanding he was trying to make time with his woman.
Yeah.
So that's not as clear in the script as all those dynamics. But what we had to do was really emphasize that moment in a way so everybody clearly understands what he's saying, because the lines don't really lead you there. If you just read that scene, you may not even get that. But we had to play it in a way where the behavior of those characters, the behavior of the girlfriend who realizes he's talking too damn much, he's about to get his ass kicked, right?
Yeah.
Right? She has to step in a way and cut things off. And she has to signal non-verbally, like with her eyes, that he needs to shut up about this. So he can go back and lose this hand and not be wondering how do you know these things about what's going on? Right. How you know these things about this rooster? This rooster here. The only way you know about when that rooster crow in the
if
morning.
he's been here.
Right.
In the morning.
In the morning. Right. Right. So when was you in the morning over here where my girlfriend is? Right.
So that's deep.
Right.
And a director's keeping pace with that, and with that, just finding and growing that talent, like as a person that produces this, because that's another role. The producer wears a big hat because they're paying for everything. And,
They sure are.
And covering that ground, but also bringing everybody together too. So
there's a lot of talent here. There is a lot of talent here.
Okay.
We don't always recognize, and we find it hard sometimes because we don't. Again, the projects that would showcase them aren't as consistent, and so we don't see that evident throughout here.
Do you take chances on new actors and actresses and new talent as much as you may, or are you always like, okay, you got to have like 4 or 5 years of experience, or been on like 10 productions, or I saw you at the Repertory Theater one time? Or,
we do a whole host of that. If you look at the show, if you look at Hastings Street, Hastings Street is going to have a wide range of talent, from people who are well seasoned, been on stage for a number of years, have had lengthy careers in in the
theater,
in television.
Yeah.
In some cases, we got one artist who's been on Broadway in shows, has never played a lead, but she's been in shows. We've got other actors who have been consistently working around here. Some of the actors who are more coming from an operatic background. Some are part of R&B groups, but have some training in theater. What we wanted, and even though we have that wide range, what we wanted to create that community. The show is a replication of the community of Hastings Street.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do through this show is evoke the spirit of this community through this community of actors. And in fact, we keep talking about that a great deal. That's part of the reason why the Harambe idea was so critical to me.
And how many people are on this show?
We have on stage 20 actors.
Wow.
10 musicians.
Wow.
And we got crew and whatnot and operators.
Yeah. Where is this going to be at?
The Music Hall.
Music Hall downtown, so you can see the marquee. Everybody knows where the Music Hall is, and you all will see more information about that.
350 Madison Avenue.
So that's also, like, as I get into my technical nerd mind, this is the other thing that goes into when you have a production that big, the choreography of it.
Right. We got
not just dancing, but you have to choreograph the steps, because if it's 20 people on stage, you can't just say, okay, I'm supposed to say I'm about to go to the store. I'm gonna walk out the door.
Right.
If you do that and there's 20 people and I don't know in which way you're going, I could bump into you.
Right.
Not good play.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Or if that happens, you got to make it look intentional. But how, even the staging like that, is the director the one that's doing a lot of that choreography? And,
I did some sketching out of some of the, but we have a choreographer who actually is doing the movement.
Okay.
She's embellishing on top of the frame that I created.
Okay.
In some things, and then she has carte blanche to do the choreography on our biggest numbers. Like the big number of the show is here on Hastings Street. It's the title song, and so she has completely choreographed that at the top, and it's the top of the second act. So it's a big number.
And okay, so when I'm getting in that zone as somebody that's relatively new, am I looking for the advice of the people that are older? Like, how am I soaking up this game to deliver on how I need to
it's
deliver?
important for us. See, this is one thing we keep forgetting. You probably heard of the brother Dr. Naeem Akbar. Okay, he came to my church back in the 90s, and he said something that sticks to me today. Our communities, and he was talking about many of the black communities, were elder ruled, adult run, but child centered. So the concept was that we were doing all we were doing for the next generation. The elders had a position of authority, respect, and honor that we focused on. The adults ran the show, but we were doing it to setting it up for the next generation. And so in much case, that's what we are doing here. We're reflecting that in the production. We have senior artists. We have artists that are some of the more senior people. They are the village elders. They are the Black Bottom elders. And we give respect and honor to them. There are adults, some of which have strayed or have redirected their energies, that the play shows, because we have to do this in more than one way. We got to show people who have sincere aspirations, but at the same time, they sometimes might make the wrong decisions for the right reasons. And so even when that happens, there has to be a community that comes back and supports you as you get on the right track. And then we got one child in the show, and she's there to remind us who all of this was for. My wife was born and raised in Black Bottom for the early part of her years. My father-in-law had a boarding house. In fact, that's how he met my mother-in-law. She and her mother came up from Alabama, and they were tenants in his boarding house, and they started dating and got married. And so that's where my wife lived for the first 2 or 3 years of her life. Her sisters, her 2 older sisters, they lived there longer. But when the city bought him out in the 50s, he took the money that they gave them, which was not it was not comparable to the value of the land.
Of the property, yeah.
He ended up going out to Ecorse Road and building a house. He and his brothers built the house that they grew up in on a plot of land that they had acquired. And he ended up becoming an independent garbage man, which you people may not know about this today, but there used to be independent garbage men who would come by and haul garbage away, as well as the municipal garbage men for a city. And so this child that's in the show is kind of representative of the children that was there, like my wife, like her sisters, who they are the real victims of what tearing down that community, because that was a huge hit on generational wealth.
Yeah.
Right? You got a business that has a certain value. You got land and property that has a certain value. The city wants to undervalue it and give you what they want, not what it's worth. And there are scalpers, people who are trying to take advantage of you. And so they think they'll scare you off, and they'll give you even less than the city's going to give them. But they'll acquire larger parcels so that when the city comes to them, they got 4 or 5 different plots. And they'll get more money because they have adjacent plots and they have a larger footprint than if they just had one property that they were trying to sell.
Yeah, that's deep.
And so the play really deals with all of that, because part of what we need to remember is that justice is not just cultural justice, it's economic justice. And we were talking about spaces where we can do this. Black Bottom was a space where all of the creativity that the black community at one time reside. That's where it was. And when we talk about spaces where black people can just be black, right? There is a debt that hasn't been paid back. And so we really need to focus on how we call out that outstanding debt and get people to understand that we have to replicate, we have to repair, we have to build these new spaces to make up for the ones that we lost, the ones that you took from us.
Okay.
And so one of the big missions of Plowshares over the next decade is to get its own home and use that home as a catalyst for transforming a community, an economic community with a really inspired act of economic development, that we partner with others to do the work that provides jobs and opportunities for folks, that provides venues and resources to help provide, to give people homes and opportunity for businesses that'll benefit the overall community.
Wow, that's deep. That's deep. It's so much more. I'm gonna have to get you on after this production because we're gonna pick up this other things.
Okay.
You trigger so many thoughts. But as we get into a close now, I have my classic Detroit is Different questions coming.
Yeah, sure.
But even before those, I just have another question about, what's this experience like? Who should I bring if I come? Like, talk to the people. What's the experience when I come to the Hastings Street? Should I plan do I dress up in a zoot suit? Do I come fleshed out? What's going to be the experience?
Brother, come as you wish. You can be dressed to the nines. You can have your jeans and t-shirt on.
Okay.
We are welcoming everybody.
Okay.
But what we want is a group of people who want to come in and experience a show that hopefully will tell them the importance of their history should not be ignored, should not be constrained because it might make somebody else uncomfortable. We need to, and what we want to do is, if we ignite your interest in the subject, then you need to take the next step to go and find out additionally
Wow.
what else you need to know about this.
Okay.
And one of the things that we're doing also is connecting to the other individuals who can share their story and expand on what we know about this community, because in many cases we have forgotten many of those elders who have vibrant stories to tell us, but for some reason we've totally ignored them. We've seen that their story doesn't matter. There's a great deal of wealth in us really seriously taking it into consideration. Conversations across generations about circumstances. Because I'm afraid in many cases we are going to be looking at forces at play in this country that our grandparents were more familiar with than we are.
Wow.
And I've been telling everybody, I am not leaving here where my grandchildren are less free than my grandparents were. So that means I got to do something.
I feel that. And I
Right?
definitely, I mean, I'm, like people know, I'm here for real. Like
Right.
Detroit is different
Right.
still here.
Right.
Kari's going to be here.
Right.
It would take a lot to shake me.
Right.
So that brings you to the classic Detroit is different questions. Very first car, year, make, and model. What year did you get it?
Year, making my very first car. It was a 1989 Dodge Shadow.
What year you get it?
I got it in '89.
Okay, so new car. Okay.
Yeah, it was a new car.
Okay, where's the first place you went when you got it?
I went to pick up my friends and joyride.
Okay, hey, that's a good. That's a good place.
We ended up going to Belle Isle.
Hey, that's
riding
a
around.
good first place.
Right.
Okay. All right. It's the end of the fireworks, which actually is happening tonight. We were recording the night of
really?
the fireworks. You're the DJ at Woodward and Jefferson. You get to play 3 songs. What 3 songs you playing?
Reasons by Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Okay.
I'm going to play Living in the City by Stevie Wonder.
I'm with that.
And I'm going to play Isley Brothers. It's going to be oh, which one? Oh goodness. What is it going to be? Because I'm trying to choose. It's going to be an Isley Brothers tune. It could
You
be.
don't know which one.
I just my go-tos, my
Okay.
my OG go-tos.
I'm with it.
Oh goodness. Going for the guns. What? Good Lord. I'm trying to think, and I'm probably blanking.
Okay. All right. Well, Isley Brothers, you can't go wrong.
Nah.
Those people down 75, as we know. That Cincinnati Lincoln Heights connection. We with it. And last question. Usually, okay, this is the switch. I always ask, who would you rename Woodward after? But that's for Detroiters. Outside is if out of towner coming to Detroit.
Yes.
Where's the first place you take people when they're like, hey, what should I do?
I take them to Belle Isle.
Oh man, you just stay on the rock. I'm with it.
That place was really important to me when I first moved here.
That's deep.
Because, and in fact, the reason why is because it's an oasis within the city. We haven't always treated it well, but it's a priceless resource. And I'm sorry that it's not completely under the control of the city any longer.
Well, many of us are. And what's unique about this play, this Hastings Street play, is that some of the catalysts in this story deals a little bit with something that happened classically
Right.
on Belle Isle.
Right.
So that's unique. And Belle Isle is a gem. You know, it's a gem. It's one of the few, I guess, places that anybody in the area, Metro Detroit, Southeast Michigan, has definitely stepped foot on.
I have spent many weekend just enjoying the day, you know, hanging out with friends, not always fishing, just shooting stuff. You know, you could be playing cards or just talking or singing, dancing. And then you have the cultural institutions there. You got the aquarium, you got the
Planetarium.
the planetarium, botanical garden. We're really blessed.
For everybody that knows, the giant slide. I know that everybody.
That's
like,
right.
The giant slide. It's
Right.
like, yes.
Right.
The giant slide for the kid in you. Definitely.
But yeah, it's that's where I always take people.
Hey, that's a great first place.
Yeah.
You know, hopefully it's not too cold though.
Hey brother, you don't know. I've done that too. I've gone at.
You take somebody from the south to Belle Isle on a February day, they're like, hey, no.
I have taken.
Good looking fountain. I'm ready to get back in the ride.
I've done that though. I've done that. I have done that.
They like, how you live up here? Ooh, the hawk is.
You know what? See, here's the thing. People need to understand. You down there in Atlanta or wherever. My brother's in Georgia. My brother's outside of Atlanta, and he talks about he used to say, you know, I don't have to shovel snow. Say yeah, but you got to deal with all the mess down there. You got to deal with people who taking your vote away, bro.
Yeah,
You know, you got to deal with people who are trying to figure out other ways of marginalizing you.
Yeah.
So how's that feel?
The possibility of Herschel Walker being a senator. Ain't that something?
Hello, right?
Ain't that something?
Right?
Ain't that something? Yeah. That's a tough one right
But
there.
that tells you right there that they have no respect for black people.
Hey, you got that right.
That's who they
right.
put up there.
Oh,
That's who they
man.
put up there. Because they think you ignorant enough just because he played football, that's all you need to know. And he black. And they think that's going to counter the obvious, overwhelming abilities of Reverend Warnock. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no. Push-up contest, all for Herschel Walker. Senator, yeah, I'm straight on that one. Exactly.
No.
So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll get some more on this where we're going to get some cast. We're going to find out more about this. This is going to be a fun one. I'm connecting. And then keep watching. I may be bringing some of the Detroit is Different people that support this to this experience because we want to support this. It's definitely tying into some rich Detroit history in a creative way, connecting with culture. Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Kari. I appreciate the opportunity.
Peace, peace.
Detroit is Different is where you get information, artistry, history, music, and even comedy. Detroit is Different, a home for the culture of Detroit. Visit online at DetroitisDifferent.com today.